workers in Europe did not reach pre-depression levels until around 1960. So all that time the standard of living was very low. We overlook it when we think of the United States. Now, in the world scale, the European scale, the workers' standard of living was very low, which made it possible, of course, with the most modern machinery, for the Europeans to produce a higher level of surplus value, or profit, from the workers. So all this was advantageous, and it's now centered on the United States. One of the major factors of the war was the United States replaces not only Germany and Japan, but also replaces England, which had been, after all, the world-dominating empire. The United States now, it's all centralized, the whole world economy now centralized in the United States. The third factor that they used, and which we now have to consider, was looting from the environment. Now, the whole world, the whole economy, the ecology changed, the production changed. Most of the changes, they took petroleum-based products for a massive expansion of the cars and private transportation. In the United States, massive growth of the suburbs, which raised, a whole new middle class was created, driving in the cars to the suburbs. Our food was all produced now with a massive use of artificial fertilizers and artificial pesticides, all created from petroleum. Our clothing, built with artificial fibers. Our homes and almost everything else built with plastic, all based on petroleum. A whole world built, a whole way of life built on petroleum. Along with similar kinds of, in effect, we were like somebody runs a company and produces something, and he uses up his raw materials, then he uses up his machinery, and a normal capitalist will put aside a certain amount, of business person will put aside a certain amount of money to replace, to buy new raw materials, to make new machinery as part of, take that out of the profits and put that aside and save it. The United States, the world capitalist class, has not been doing that. It has been using the natural capital of unreplaceable petroleum and so forth, and the natural world, our air, the earth and so forth, and instead of replacing it and conserving it and rebuilding it and building alternatives to what's being used up, has been treating it as though it was part of the profits, as well as part of what they can use to buy off whole layers of the working class as part of their higher, quote-unquote, apparently higher standard of living. And all that's been done because they don't count the fact that sooner or later they're going to have to get alternate sources of energy. Sooner or later they're going to have to clean up the air that we're all breathing. Sooner or later you got to do something to protect the environment and the world. But all that's not taken into consideration. The oil was so cheap to get out of the ground, you don't count the fact that eventually you're going to reach peak oil and something's going to be very, very expensive. So we've been living in this kind of fool's paradise. Capitalism has been living on these fictitious profits. And the high standard of living, relatively speaking, of working people as compared to during the Depression, has been phony. Because it didn't count all this stuff. And suddenly, this stuff starts coming due. Suddenly the environment has to be paid for. Even the capitalists these days, most of them, realize that you've got to do something about the melting ice caps in the world, construction, the heating, and so forth. They would like to find a cheap way to handle it. In fact, we know that the entirety of the way we use technology has got to be rebuilt and reorganized. They are not capable of doing this. They are pressed to find alternate ways of dealing with this decline, the return of the epic of capitalist decay. That's what we're talking about. As Eric pointed out, since the end of the 60s, it's all been downhill. Instead of immediately dropping off the cliff, it's sort of been going down a little bit and up a little bit and down a little bit further and up a little bit and down a little bit further. The cycle has been going on, but a general direction has been slowly down. And since the 60s and 70s, I know people, friends of mine, who have been predicting that sooner or later it's going to break through and it's going to be a major crash. because what they're counting as profits has largely been fake. And they are now saying that. They're now saying, oh, there's the financial world, and then there's the real economy. I'm going to read this in the papers. The real economy produces real goods and services, things you can put your hands on. The financial world, the money, the paper. And they can put out more and more paper. And they circulate it and buy it and sell it back and forth. And these pieces of paper, this paper world, this fake economy, is a set of the rights to property, the rights to goods, the rights to value. Except it only works so long as nobody actually tries to use it. If they took all these demands, all the things that are the profit that they're listing as their profits, and they all went down at the same time and tried to actually buy real goods, it would collapse. Or there would be enormous inflation, of course, but in any case, the point is they couldn't do it. What they treat as great profits are really mostly fake. And suddenly it's happening now. They're saying, wait a minute, you know, this is fake, this doesn't work. And it vanishes. Oh, all this wealth vanished, as Eric pointed out, in housing and so forth. That's what happens in a bubble. All this wealth suddenly vanishes. Well, the whole economy is in a bubble. It's not just the housing is a bubble. The whole economy is a Ponzi scheme. And suddenly that vanishes. How are they going to get it back? They are faced with a certain set of demands, certain needs. They have to lower the standard of living of working people. That is, in Marxist economics, they have to lower the value of the commodity labor power drastically. They've been lowering it gradually. They've been smashing unions and weakening the unions to the point where during the post-war prosperity, we had something like a third of the workforce, the labor force, was in unions. Today, it's about, 14%?
If that.
And in the private sector, which used to be the whole third, it's down to about 7%. 7%. So we're mostly a non-union economy. But that's not enough. It's still, they've got to really wipe it out. It's not just a question of unions as such. They have to smash the standard of living of working people. They've been pushing on the edges, attacking the standard of living of poor people, or the people of black people, people of color. And that's what the whole thing about getting rid of welfare and so forth. Now, they really aren't going to solve their problems by cutting the standard of living of the people on the periphery. They've got to take the vast part of the working class. It's got to all be lowered, including the vast middle class they've created, white-collar workers, which is particularly prosperous and seeming to have a higher standard of living. They say it becomes a real depression only when it hits your family. And just a couple weeks ago, my sister-in-law lost her house. It suddenly hits home when all these people who thought they were middle class don't have homes, can't send their kids to college, which seemed to be, that was an automatic part of being a middle class. You could find a way to send your kid to college. Medicine, a life or death issue, not just a matter of, it would be nice for next to have a luxury and extra vacation, is suddenly beyond people's standard of living. And they say, oh, we're going to have universal health. They couldn't create universal health. If they couldn't create universal health care during the period of prosperity that Truman raised back and after a period of World War II, during the post-war boom, they aren't going to be able to do it now. This is all talk and collaborative to fool people. It's not going to happen. So there's a push. What do they have to do? War might solve their problems, except there's an extra problem for that, which is the fact that a world war today, would be a nuclear war, which would make a problem for capitalism, maybe because it would destroy the human race, maybe, or civilization. It's what saved us, in a way, from the fact that we got through the Cold War, and the Western capitalists and the state capitalists in the Soviet Union didn't go to war because of the danger of nuclear war. But it keeps on being pushed out. You can't have capitalism without war. You can't have capitalism without war. You can't have capitalism without war. You can't have capitalism without war.